Right, okay, so I've not actually rehearsed this, I've never done this before, it's the first time, so it would just be good to get some feedback afterwards, if that's okay. It's based on something I did when I was at university, and it's been shut away in a portfolio for 15 years, and I just thought I'd drag it out and see what happens. And it's my first PowerPoint presentation I've ever done as well. I hate computers, so let's see how it goes. So, multidimensional design. Oh, here we go.
Is it not working?
I know. I thought it was too good that technology hasn't let me down yet. I've got to switch it off. Right, okay. So, what is multidimensional design? Okay. So, designing using with the use of techniques that allow access to the unconscious dimensions of the human mind, and possibly other dimensions of a universal mind. So that's opening to the idea that can ideas come from outside of the mind or the human unconscious. Okay. So it is a kind of design philosophy that generates original ideas, or more original ideas than would be influenced by what we see around us in everyday life. Okay. So the aim, obviously, it enhances creativity and adds value, makes ideas more meaningful. Obviously, if you're being more creative, you're going to produce more interesting ideas. Okay, if ideas are coming from a far out place, as opposed to something you already see in everyday life that you're influenced by. Okay, so would anyone like to give a suggestion or a definition of what creativity is?
Almost anything, if you're trying to utilise your ideas, that's creativity. Either, you know, hands-on, in your mind, writing, almost anything. If you're utilising a thought to create something.
Definition.
Yeah.
Usually with computers you say garbage in, garbage out. Creativity is garbage out without garbage in.
Right, interesting. Did you say computers garbage out, garbage out?
Garbage in.
Oh, garbage in.
And garbage out.
Right. I don't understand why.
Someone laughed. So.
Oh, right. I just don't get it.
I guess I always want to put creativity equals inspiring or inspiration.
Yeah.
Other word that I think of when I see that or hear
is inspiration.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. Inspire. Is that meaning also breathing in? Inspire is a word I've heard used in that way as well.
Oh yeah, inspire. I've also heard.
Inspire and expire.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've also heard the word inspire also means in spirit.
Oh, cool.
So that's another kind of connection. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I was going to say about opening up your mind and your spirit and allowing it to manifest.
Yeah.
So that other people, so the creativity is manifested. It's not just something within you.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. All right. So there's some ideas. Here's just a couple of definitions I've come up with. This actually came from, oh no, that's not from a dictionary, that's just my generating or using original ideas, or doing something that has never been done before, and bringing something into existence. And the reason I've put that in blue is because I'm going to come back to it a bit later, because it's quite profound actually. Okay, so alright, so we've got some definitions of creativity, but creativity is often mistaken as visual output, and it's not just about visual output. So a definition of creativity can be that creativity can be anything that is not normal, and normal can be anything that we do not find shocking or that doesn't make us stop and think. So if a designer were able to install a submarine astroport with a constellation in another galaxy, they would be superhuman. But if they were to think about doing it, they would be creative. So like a lover, a creative dares to be a fool. but the paradox is that the best creative solutions don't come into existence without absurdity, but they don't work without reality, and reality limits possibilities. Okay, so that's just a little one
Reality.
definition of creativity.
Too real. It's not good.
Okay, who would like to suggest what an idea is? This is really difficult.
I think it refers to what I just said earlier. You know, it's that thing in your mind that's you're stretching your mind.
But what actually is it? You said it's a thing in your mind.
Yeah.
What's that
I
thing?
don't know. Well, yeah.
Maybe it's the connection between two thoughts, or like a new route between two things to create something new.
Right.
It literally feels like it's just downloaded from your higher self.
This is good.
That's
You
what
know,
mean.
you know the whole presentation already.
No, I don't. 'Cause
Have you hacked my computer?
You know, if you get a thought, if you get a thought coming in, where's that come from?
Yeah.
You have premeditated it.
Yeah.
So where else is it going to come from? It's
Yeah.
going to come through your, let's say your soul, your higher self, or somewhere else into your consciousness.
Right. Possibly. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Any other definitions?
Very generally, ideas are the production of the activity of the brain.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I
I'm
think
just.
they can start off as feelings before they're manifested into thoughts.
Okay. Yeah. Feelings. Okay. All right. I'm just going to run through a few ideas here. My first idea is I've no idea what an idea is. What actually is an idea really? What is an idea made of? Right, that might sound daft. What is the chemical composition of an idea? Because you can say, what's the chemical composition of a shadow? Because it is in fact made of photons, so it is a particle. But an idea is even more bizarre because what is it made of? It's not made of any, it doesn't appear to be made of anything physical, yet it manifests in our brain. So is it physical in one sense because it's in our mind? I don't know, nobody knows. And where do ideas come from? Again, nobody knows. And does an idea exist before it's actually thought of? Is it already there somewhere else? Or is it created in your mind? And does an idea ever really exist? If so, where? Okay. So ideas are mysterious, creativity is mysterious, and consciousness is part of the whole thing. Science still doesn't know what consciousness actually is. Okay. Would anyone like to suggest, give some ideas of what consciousness is?
An awareness.
Yeah, that's probably the best one. Who said that?
Me.
Yeah, that's probably the most explanatory. I think that's the dictionary definition. It's to do with awareness. Yeah. But again, to know what it actually is, it's coming back to the saying what an idea is. If it doesn't really exist physically, I don't even know what I'm talking about because I don't know what it is and nobody knows what it is. Okay, it's the biggest. The central nervous system is the most complicated thing known to man in the universe, and consciousness is part of it. So we don't understand it. We don't know what it is. Okay. Like you said, yeah, it's about awareness of surroundings on a simple level. I've already said that. Okay, and again, the spark that generates consciousness is one of the greatest mysteries on earth. Some call it the Philosopher's Stone. That's not only what alchemists do to try and turn base metals into gold. The Philosopher's Stone is the spark, the magic that turns rock into a living organism. So if the planet's 4.5 billion years old, when it first started, there was no life. So the atoms that make up our bodies came out of the earth, and something happened that produced consciousness, and that's the magic. Nobody knows what it is. That's the biggest mystery. Okay, so it's magic. and the magician doesn't want us to see how the trick is done. So if everything was being created by a god, you could look upon God as a magician, a simple magician who does illusions. They don't want people to know how the trick is actually done.
It's all done with smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors, yeah. So we're getting back into the, sorry, what was your name? The pink top?
Oh, Helen.
Helen, yeah, Helen started hitting upon this idea earlier. Is creativity something divine? And back to the idea of it being about bringing something into existence, because I'd like to suggest that every idea that could possibly ever exist already exists, and it was created at the time of the Big Bang, because if you think about it, the potential for everything to happen must have been created then. So when we have an idea, are we tapping into something that was created back then, or are we actually creating something new ourselves? That's the question. So the theory I've just said, all ideas that can never exist within the conscious mind already exist within the unconscious or somewhere outside the mind. And the potential for any idea to exist within the human mind was created at the time of the Big Bang. So when we visualize an idea, we are tapping into something that already exists. Or are we creators? Are we little gods and goddesses? Do we create something from nothing? Okay, I don't know the answer. So here's just some suggestions about where ideas can come from, and I'll just go into each one. So this whole, I've got something to point, I need one of these lasers. So this whole, from top to bottom, represents all ideas that can ever exist within the entire universe. Okay? Up to here, this represents different dimensions of the mind, and this is different dimensions of the universe. And these are different techniques that can be used to access different levels of the unconscious and different dimensions of the universe, possibly. So first of all, consciousness. Ideas are generated through the influence of what we see around us through the five senses. Okay? So what we produce from conscious influences in terms of ideas isn't likely to be highly original, because we're copying something that we've already seen. And then there's the next level is the personal unconscious, which is individual to each person, and it's moulded by your personal experience of life growing up as a child, your culture and background, what your parents did with you and that sort of thing. Okay? So everyone's going to have a different perspective. And here we start to get interesting with the collective unconscious. This was an idea that Carl Jung did a lot of work on, and his research proved with empirical evidence, like based on observation, that there is a collective unconscious, a common element to everyone's mind all over the planet, okay, even on the other side of the world. They can possess the same ideas. And those ideas are called archetypes. And the easiest, after all the reading I did on Jung, the easiest, most simple way I could find to describe what an archetype is, in a Jungian term, is that it's an instinct. So the same way that a bird knows how to fly in a certain direction, to go home or to go somewhere in the winter or summer, that is how we produce myths. And a lot of common architecture you see is influenced by archetypes. So it could be described as a universal code written into the fabric of space that we can all tap into. And it can happen naturally, you don't have to force it. It just happens sometimes when no conscious ideas are present. So mythology is a typical example, stone circles and pyramids. And the Beatles' music, some might not call that archetypal, but could you imagine the world without their music? Is it possible that music could never have been made? I don't think it is, and I think that music was always going to exist. It couldn't not have happened. So that's why I'm suggesting that might be archetypal. Might be a load of rubbish, but it's just an idea. And the motor car, no one would call that archetypal, but the thing that's interesting about the motor car is that there really is. Why do all cars have 4 wheels and they're almost all the same shape? And it's because it's the best possible way to produce that transport. And I'm suggesting that that idea always existed. Because it can't be improved upon, then the idea was part of everything before it was even realised. Okay. So here's some examples of different cultures that have produced the same kind of architecture, and this is called a man called Graham Hancock coined the phrase triptych architecture, because these 3 cultures, when they built these pyramids, they were not in communication with each other physically. They weren't travelling across the sea. There's no evidence that they were. So why did they all produce pyramids? And why did they all produce these entrances with 1 large entrance and 2 small ones? And this, these symbols are hidden in. They're not hidden. Masons put them there deliberately in lots of buildings. It's a kind of hidden code. And I do actually do a mystic tour of Brighton, and I talk more about this in that tour. Okay, and it's these symbols are in the Royal Pavilion. They're in a lot of churches and cathedrals. Okay.
Can you broaden on that?
Sorry.
Can you broaden on that? I mean, that is really interesting.
It's a whole presentation in itself.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right.
I can another time,
Yeah,
or if you
yeah,
come on my mystic tour, you
I
can
won't
find
go.
out there as well.
I'm moving away for a while, but that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. What I can tell you quickly is that these 3 entrances, there's a large entrance and 2 small ones. The 2 small entrances represent your 2 eyes that you see the physical world with. Third one represents your 3rd eye. Okay. And in some cathedrals, not just that, but there are other hidden messages that explain how to achieve enlightenment and open your 3rd eye, so you see the world in an enlightened state rather than a 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional world.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
Okay, so the next level, the antipodes of the mind. This was an idea that Aldous Huxley came up with. And here ideas are influenced by nothing that we can explain with common sense. Here we find highly creative ideas with greatly diminished conscious influence. So this, so I've just chosen a Salvador Dali painting to illustrate it, because he was really weird. Huxley did his research by taking LSD or some other kind of hallucinogenic drug, and he noticed that the things that were coming into his mind he could not explain from the collective unconscious, any experience he'd ever had. I haven't taken LSD myself, but I did have a hash cookie once and it made me hallucinate, and if I could put into a video what I saw in my head, I would be a millionaire, because it was unbelievable. Because Aldous Huxley suggests that our minds have what's called a reducing valve, which only allows in a certain amount of information that we need to survive as 4-dimensional beings. And if you open that valve up, all this other incredible stuff comes in that doesn't help us survive, but the trouble is it drives you mad as well. So it's really interesting, and I had to actually call an ambulance because I thought I'd gone mad. I saw, I won't go into any more detail about that, but yeah, that was scary.
It's really interesting that Huxley decided to take acid to study the work of someone who predominantly used sleep deprivation for many days to reach the altered state in his brain, I think.
Yeah, he was studying patients with sleep deprivation, did you say?
No, sleep deprivation is what Dali used extensively.
Oh, yeah.
He would only let himself sleep for the amount of time it would take for his muscles to relax,
Yeah.
for his spoon to fall onto the floor,
Yeah.
and that would be all the sleep he would get.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe minutes or seconds, you know, but like, he wasn't prolific in using acid.
Yeah,
to,
no,
to
Dali didn't take drugs
Yeah,
apparently.
so
There are other
it's
methods
interesting.
of
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
accessing
So it's
it,
interesting that Huxley went down that route.
Yeah, yeah. Don't know why everyone's got their own route.
Oh yeah, totally. Maybe
Yeah.
he's just like a good time guy.
I think it was, wasn't it?
So this is what Huxley says about the reducing valve. To make biological survival possible, the mind at large has to be funneled through the reducing valve of the brain and nervous system, and what comes out at the other end is the measly trickle of the kind of consciousness which will help us to stay alive on the surface of this particular planet.
That's boring.
Brighton is famous for having a lot of nutters, is that fair enough to say? And that's because a lot of people in Brighton are not just taking drugs, but exploring things like shamanism and all sorts of strange spiritual stuff they're seeking, and that messes your mind up. So they're regarded to be mental, whereas they might just be, I don't know where I'm heading here, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Eccentric.
Eccentric, yeah, that's another way. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, they don't
adventurous.
fit in with the common with the norms anymore.
No.
They're regarded to be mental, whereas who knows whether they're
Independent.
seeing something more real or less real. There's no way of really knowing.
No, they are seeing something different, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't know if it's more real. We don't know if it's a delusion
Uh-huh.
or if it is that stuff really exists and they're seeing something beyond what someone who hasn't seen that stuff has
It's
seen.
often quite a bright mind.
Sorry?
It's quite a bright mind quite often, the eccentric. I
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
I think you can only feel whether it's real if you're in the middle of that yourself. On the outside, you never quite know if they're real or deluded.
No, yeah. There's a really good book, a Carlos Castaneda book, Teachings of Don Juan,
Oh yeah.
and it's all about that. And you never know whether the guy is actually, if it's just in his head, or if someone else can see the stuff that he's seeing. It's really done in a really clever way.
Yeah.
That sounds an interesting book.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I recommend it.
Do you?
There's a whole series, right?
Yeah.
So the next level is the astral plane. I know very little about this, where ideas are influenced by angels, spirits and immaterial beings, whatever they may be. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about that because I don't know anything about it. Oh, does anyone want to say anything about that? Does anyone know anything about the astral plane and psychic powers?
There are
And
some very clever people out there, aren't there? I
there's
know.
what, sorry?
There's some very clever people out there
Yeah.
who touch on that. Yes. And they hit the right note quite often. They're
They
clever.
do, sometimes.
Yeah.
Some do,
Yes.
some are charlatans.
Yeah, yeah,
Some
yeah, and
maybe.
it's finding who are the charlatans.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so one of the whole points of this, the reason I got interested in this idea when I was a student, I was doing three-dimensional product design, and I thought, okay, three-dimensional, what about the fourth, fifth, and that kind of thing? And I wanted to produce something that has never been seen before. And I thought, well, that's impossible because you can only produce something through influences you've seen of something else. Like Salvador Dali's painting, you saw elephants with long legs and obelisks on their back. When you put all of those things together, it's new and unique, but individually there's ideas there that exist in real life. There's an elephant, there's long legs, there's an obelisk. They're all and I wanted to produce something that's never been seen before. So I wanted to and one of the reasons for this, when you think about postmodernism, recycling is a stark example of conscious influences. You're recycling old ideas and attaching something new to it, and it's often very tacky, the results. So we've got classical architecture here with neon lights on it. and this is revolting. It's absolutely, it's unbelievable. This is, you know,
Where is that?
I don't know. I just found it on the internet. I don't want to know.
Is it real?
It's real. Yeah.
They think they're being avant-garde or something.
What country is it in?
I don't know. I should find out actually. I just found it
It
randomly
looks
on
like
the
they're driving
internet.
on the left-hand side though. I don't know if I'm right or whether they're just parked.
It looks like it's probably America. Okay, so this is just something to illustrate the idea. So this is the designer. If he's looking, this line represents the divide between the conscious and the unconscious. So long as he's above the line and looking at the three-dimensional, four-dimensional world, whichever, it's four-dimensional actually, he's going to be influenced by things that already exist. But if he uses an unconscious design process or a technique to enter this pool of ideas that contain all the ideas that can ever possibly exist, the deeper he goes, the more original the ideas are going to get. And you can use different techniques to delve into that pool. So these are some of the techniques or processes that I experimented with, apart from the drugs and the psychic power. I did interview a witch, but I didn't get much from her. I think she was a fake. Okay, so hypnosis, that's obviously exploring the subconscious. And this is an example of, I drew this picture of heaven consciously, and I got a hypnotherapist to put me under and tell me to draw a picture of heaven, and that's what I got. I've no idea what it means, but it's definitely more interesting. Visualization and meditation, that's exploring a deep conscious state, so creative visualization can be very powerful. Symbolic representation, if you're designing something, instead of just going ahead and doing it as you would, a designer would normally, you can produce the product or idea just in symbols, because symbols often have a deeper unconscious meaning, and then those symbols can lead to ideas that you can apply to a practical product. This is my favourite one, perceptual innocence, so exploring nonsense and irrational behaviour which we can learn from children. And just to illustrate this, I asked some adults to draw some pictures of heaven, and then some children to do the same. So the adults drew very, what's the word? Literal, yeah.
Concrete?
Yeah. So they just came up with a quite a rational,
Reality,
it's a real idea, relating it to something physical, a big comfortable bed. That's his idea of heaven. And another adult said his idea of heaven was riding his bike down a hill when the wind's on your back and there's no noise, a graceful flowing hill. That's his idea of heaven. But the children, this is what you would expect from a child, that they would draw clouds. These are their pet animals in heaven. It's quite a typical child's drawing of heaven. So heaven's in the sky, me and my brother on the ground, dog in heaven, and a person in heaven. Okay, so that's what you would expect, but this one is really weird. It's difficult to tell what it is, but if you read the artist's notes when I asked them to explain it, they said the sun is in heaven, fall down from cloud into heaven, square trapper, place you get trapped, prickles in heaven. That's what I call creative, because it's just so weird. Where did it come from? What does it mean? It's so unique, you wouldn't expect anyone.
Prickles in heaven.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So that is not comfortable, is it?
Maybe.
No.
Who knows what they were thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that just illustrates how perceptual innocence can be a lot more creative. And I did the same with the idea of another world. So one of the adults, I was a student in Leeds, they'd never been to London. So their idea of another world was going to London, because it's a big scary place that they've never seen. And another one, this is probably the most uncreative student that ever, a design student, and this was their idea of another world. Okay. Very literal. And the child's ideas, however, more interesting. So this is another child's idea of another world. The interesting thing is the notes. It says the world is up in the sky. And I said, well, how can the world be up in the sky if you're here on the ground? We're in the world here, so how's the world up in the sky? And they just said, because it should be. And the flats are down there because they should be. Doesn't make sense, but it doesn't have to. Again, it's more creative than what the adults did. And this one's really good. This kid's idea of another world. He drew a giant spotted egg. And there seems to be somebody floating above it in the sky.
Lovely, isn't it?
And the notes, he said, when I asked him to explain it, he said, Scotland's like Scotch eggs, aren't they? Scotland, where it's hot, ginormous like Scotch eggs, Tyrannosaurus Rex. Okay? Again, a lot more creative than just drawing a picture of another planet with different shaped countries on it. So that's enough evidence to prove that. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have moved on yet. So just to continue about. So where that idea can be used by us as designers is just to do something. If you're designing a bag for a handbag, you don't design a handbag for a woman or a man, you design a handbag for a penguin or something really mental, or design a travel agent for a picture frame. When you start producing images based on those ideas, loads of weird stuff comes out, and you can find little things in it that lead to practical things that are going to be a lot more creative than ideas that came from conscious influences. So this is another one, indirect research, so exploring the unconscious of what the questioned mind creates. So if you want to come up with some original ideas, you can interview people and ask them weird questions to get weird answers that can lead to new ideas. So I interviewed a witch, and she told me to visualise the image of a key, and I immediately visualised a great big key, this kind of, the bottom one, that kind of style, a great big rusty key, sort of this sort of size. And I then thought after, why did I think of that? Why didn't I hold a Yale key, a small Yale key in my hand every day, so why didn't I just visualise a Yale key? And she said it's because the big fat rusty key appealed to my unconscious. Okay, so it's a way of, again, accessing the unconscious and developing more interesting ideas. Hallucinogenic drugs we've already talked about. I haven't tried that other than what I've already said. Anyone had any experiences with that, wants to share?
We're all frightened.
And psychic powers, again, something I don't know much about and I haven't had experience of using to gain ideas. Okay, it's just an idea. Okay, now our case study. So the use of, this is a case study of a product I designed using irrational ideas, hypnosis and creative visualization. So I went to my tutor and said I want to design a 5-dimensional object as my major project in my 3rd year, and he told me that I was fucked up and I should have a year off. So I had to get his approval, so I couldn't just go ahead and do it. So I said, all right, okay, I'm going to design a lunchbox then, just to please him, because he could understand that better. But what I didn't tell him was that I was going to design a lunchbox for a radiator. So unfortunately I've lost the first image I produced that I showed him, where I produced an image of lots of radiators going for a picnic in the countryside, and they laid out a little